Okay, so hi, I'm Kyle Reynolds. I'm one of the committee members for Gabrielle Fishbaine's thesis, along with Jose Ibarra and Chris Cornelius. We'll kind of sit in the background and let the critics speak, but we're joined today by DuFour, who is a former fellow at UWM and is currently at Cornell University, Joshua Stein at Woodbury, and Daniel Gillen from SOM, as well as Alex Timmer and Nikole Bouchard from UWM. So I'll hand it over to Gabrielle and you can take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me virtually. My name is Gabrielle Fishbaine, and I'm a 3-year grad student. I'm going to give a brief introduction and then request that you have the website pulled up in your browser. The link is in the Zoom chat to play the video on your own screen with the audio on at the given time, since it'll be much better quality than Zoom. After the video is played, please join me back on the Zoom shared screen for the remainder of the presentation. After the presentation is over, we'll have plenty of time for comments and questions. I invite everyone to explore the website on your own after the presentation as well, to view the images at a higher resolution. Speckled in the Pacific Ocean lay the 9 small atolls of Tuvalu. With the lagoon to the west and the ocean to the east, the thinnest slice of land on the main island of Funafuti is less than 30 feet wide. The lagoon, ocean, and rain splash and settle into pools of water on the land. Sand lightly coats the street, and waste has nowhere to go but upward as it becomes intertwined with the ground. As sea level continues to rise by an average of 3.9 millimeters per year, the blur between land, water, and its relationship to living species is strikingly apparent. If you could press play on the video now. I'll turn my audio off. A Tale of Water, Waste, and Human Trace explores how natural processes and human trace interact. It questions how architecture can reveal and respond to already existing phenomena instead of preventing opposite conditions from meeting. It calls to attention processes that are already occurring all around us and conveys ways in which we interact and can adapt with them. I visited Funafuti this past January, just in time to get stuck in Tropical Cyclone Tino. These images of my time there reflect the aftermath of the storm. Constant heavy rain, intense wind, and debris everywhere. I learned though that these were not rare conditions and by no means kept Tuvaluans from going about their lives. Through the downpour, people passed by on motorbikes, through massive pools of water to the convenience store, or simply for a ride around the island. While in Funafuti, I documented and observed existing conditions and instances of reclamation of both natural and man-made phenomena at various scales. The ability of waste to form new landscapes. Water encroaching upon the land from the lagoon and ocean on the opposite side. The capacity to throw a rock from the lagoon side up and over the land into the ocean on the opposite side. As I boarded the plane to leave, which comes in and out of Tuvalu 2 times a week, the island of Funafuti was having a cleanup day, where all of the residents participate in removing the debris from the storm. When I arrived home, I began making models from found objects and materials that documented and explored the existing conditions that I observed while in Funafuti. The delicate vegetation growing out of a solid rock form, the mixing of natural elements and human trace that result into entirely something else, or the layering of plastic and sand that become new ground conditions. These models then became the basis for the creation of 5 fantastical interventions that respond to existing conditions that I observed while in Funafuti. Sited along the largest islet, each intervention reveals, anticipates, or adapts to various processes of reclamation of the natural world and anthropogenic impact. This site is meant to be viewed as an archive, a collection of photographs, constructs, and interventions that explore this dialogue. It can be viewed zoomed out, such as how we're looking at it now, where you can click into each individual element, zoomed in to the particular interventions, or by subjects, which connect similar ideas between photographs, interventions, and models. The first intervention, entitled Eroding Matter, looks to the effect of sea level rise on coastal erosion. This formation goes through various changes. The beginning solid form erodes to reveal smaller formations within. These objects of various sizes serve as urban furniture, climbing structures, or simply a destination of pause. As erosion continues, a mesh structure is revealed, perfect for containing sand and other street debris. Eroding matter is located in the densest part of Funafuti, which is home to 6,000 people out of the 11,000 that live on all 9 atolls. You can see here the relationship to the landing strip, which becomes a big soccer ground while the planes aren't coming in, and the 3 main roads that are sandwiched by the lagoon and the ocean. This intervention was largely inspired by a study testing how water can affect a solid whole and disperse it into smaller parts. Floating Gardens is located at the end of the landing strip on the island, adjacent to the livestock pens. With poor soil quality and water encroaching upon the land due to flooding, the vegetation can be manually shifted upwards. The shading elements are made up of recycled plastic from the intervention entitled Garbage No More, which we will get to shortly. They can be attached in various orientations, protecting visitors from the sun, directing the water to the garden bed and catchment systems below, which provide a source of fresh water, which is a scarcity for Tuvaluans. Rainwater is the only source of fresh water on the island. With each notch up, the garden beds are lifted up and away from the ground, while also providing a visible cue of the impact of these natural processes. While in Funafuti, I observed these lifted platforms where people lounge during the day, nap, and the way the beds are lifted up off the ground are very much so inspired by these. Here's an image of the landing strip that becomes a large soccer field, and you can see the livestock pens in the background. As we journey up towards the northern tip of the island, we come across the thinnest width of land, connecting the southern and northern parts by a bridge. This bridge is the only route to get to the Funafuti dump site, which collects all of the waste on the island, and the many homes that are located in the northern portion of the island, making it an essential route. As water from the lagoon and ocean overtake the bridge, this way around provides an alternative travel path for Tuvaluans. The rings peel up and away from the existing bridge on the lagoon side. As water encroaches upon each ring, water spouts and directs the path of travel to the next outer ring. while looking inward to the spurts or outwards towards the lagoon. You can see here as on the thickest part of the island, you have 3 main roads, and then they converge into one road that leads to the northern and southern tips. So this is showing the close relationship between this thin piece of land, the lagoon, and the ocean. This is the existing roadway. At only 5 meters, the highest point of all of Funafuti, the trees and vegetation are really the only barrier between the water of both the lagoon and ocean and the people, objects, and things that live on the island. The Funafuti dump site is located at the northern tip of the island. With limited landmass, heaps of waste take up valuable area, spanning the entire width of the ocean to the lagoon. Garbage No More takes advantage of disposed plastic and proposes an alternative to sort, recycle, and yield a new sense of purpose on this man-made material. The shapes of the 9 atolls are simplified to create a library of parts for recycled plastic formations, all sharing 2 common edges that fit together like a puzzle. As more plastic is collected as time goes on, the formations expand. Here, these studies are from found man-made objects and how the layering of natural debris, artificial debris, result into a new ground condition, the merging of plastic and natural debris. These are images from the existing dump site. So again, this is where waste from the entire island is kept. And once you go through the entire site, you're able to get to the very tip of the island and look out towards the other islets. At the end of the island, just past Garbage No More, we come across the last intervention, entitled Illuminating Sprouts. As the lagoon, ocean, and sky flood the land, illuminating sprouts emit color dependent on the amount of water collected in the water tank below. This is a way for Tuvaluans to quickly visualize the extent to which water is rising. The wind creates the dancing movement of the sprouts, surrounding those who visit. The collected water provides an additional source of fresh water. Looking up at the sky with the sprouts fluttering around. This intervention was largely influenced by this model, which was exploring how such a delicate entity is able to be embedded into a solid, rigid form and still be able to have life. This project is a collection of artifacts that reveal and respond to ways that different processes and elements are already occurring, in ways in which they mix, intervene, and are in the process of reclamation. It explores ways living species may experience such phenomena. Thank you, everyone, for spending this time with me, and I'd like to open it up to any questions or comments. And again, if you could just spend a couple minutes afterwards looking at the site on your own to view it at a better resolution.
I maybe have a clarification question.
Sure.
I'm curious. It seems like in the various interventions, the sort of attitude towards the environment changes relative to your position on what like architecture's role is in that. And so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how in each, and I just was taking some notes earlier today, but it seems like each intervention jumps between whether it's referential, meaning that it's not actually engaging the environment, but it's referencing some process in the environment, versus like the floating garden, which is about like the collection of rainwater, or the sort of recycled tolls, versus like the bridge, which is like a trace of the changes in the environment. Like the bridge actually allows you to trace what's sort of the environmental impacts on the island, versus the last project, illuminating sprouts, which also seems like it's referential in the sense that it's like it's not actually acting on the environment, but it's sort of making some process within the environment visible. So I don't know if you can, like, should we be reading these through the lens of one attitude towards the environment, or do you see this differently?
I think so. The main consistency between all of the interventions is how they're responding to whether it's natural elements or what mankind is putting into the world. And the response, through the interventions, I'm exploring ways in which this can be revealed. So I suppose each one does explore this in a different way. So the bridge, visibly from the spurting of the water and directing the path of travel, as you're physically not able to inhibit each ring, and the path of travel is directed outwards, versus, again, like you said, floating gardens, which is a manual lifting of the beds as the water continues to rise and more is collected. So I think each are exploring a different take, but all carrying a similar tone and experimenting how, by responding to what's already happening. I mean, I think my attitude is that, I mean, nature is going to take over, as well as the elements that we're putting into the world. So what are various ways that architecture can respond to this and reveal it?
I mean, in the same vein as that, I mean, do you think that the people here are unaware that they need to be sort of reminded by these things?
I do not. I think being there, it was really evident that, I mean, talking with people, this is their home and they feel deeply rooted to this place. And I know some younger people that I talked to have already started like immigrating to other countries, Australia, New Zealand, but a lot of the older population, regardless of the weather conditions, this is their home. And so I don't necessarily see the interventions as a reminder, but more so as this is happening. So what else can architecture do? How can we make something of what's already occurring?
Yeah, I think that's valid. I mean, I guess my question is of all the islands that I've ever been in, you know, in this kind of scale and particular location, which is few, but Southeast Asia and around there, you know, people are very aware of what's going on. I mean, they see it way more than we do. So my question, you know, it was kind of rhetorical, but I think you answered it well, is just that, you know, I guess what I was hoping for is to see some kind of way to activate the populace there. Maybe it doesn't have to be architectural, but like the next level of like, how do you achieve these types of ideas? And not to be too sort of realistic, because I know that it's an academic exercise, and I think it's very ambitious, and so I commend you for that. And also, it's sort of a very under analyzed and under focused group of people and geographic location. So that's great. I would, you know, I guess what I would hope to glean from this presentation is, you know, what would it take to fix these problems a little bit? You know, like you have the populace that understands that there's a problem. You know, I mean, like what's the next step in activation to achieve these types of things? You know, like, I guess it was sort of what I was hoping we could, you know, the social impact or something like that, economic impact. I mean, I know it's not necessarily for this exercise, but it's just something to think about in the future. And also my other comment would be, I was initially skeptical about the representative technique, but I think that it became successful, particularly when you talked about the bridge and also this sort of seating with the kids and things like that. And I thought you know, it's just really important that the way that you represent the visuals that you communicate to the people that are viewing them, they say a lot about what the project is, you know, sort of subconsciously. And so I think that, you know, when you got to those kinds of renderings or imagery, it really helped to communicate the feeling. So that was good. Yeah,
part of the exercise was using the photographs of the found models and photographs from while I was at my visit to solely make up the imagery.
That's challenging, yeah.
And perhaps, yeah, and I think it's a really, it's a very beautiful project. It's very thoughtful, and I would say maybe there's something about it that maybe even there's a literary quality, a kind of descriptive quality, where you're kind of allowing a certain, allowing the atmosphere of the context to presence itself in a certain way. So, and also sort of bringing us into it. I thought that was delightful. And also it's sort of a bit difficult for me to find a way in to the project, or a way to maybe to begin to critique it or ask questions of it. I think maybe I'll take off a little bit from, I think it was Daniel who just spoke, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's and maybe I'll frame my question, you know, along those lines, but somewhat differently. I guess the question of already existing modes of appropriation and modes of environmental experience, I think is something that it might have been useful to see a bit more of. And by that I mean not necessarily the kind of practical ways of living, you might say, but even something like existing imaginaries of Tuvaluans. How is this something like climate, something like environment, atmosphere, how does it present itself in narrative, in literature, in maybe even storytelling, or other modes of artistic practice. And maybe there's something about maybe there's a kind of environmental imaginary that's a part of the kind of historical, cultural understanding in myth, for example. Mm-hmm. So I think perhaps maybe if aspects of the project spoke a bit more to those kinds of understandings and imaginaries, I think that would probably complement your attempt to describe, in a way, the project. To me, I see the project as kind of quite descriptive, and I mean that in a very positive light. The way ethnographers, before they theorize about conditions, they attempt to describe it, and the description affords a certain empathy, and a relationship develops with context. So those are just a few thoughts.
Thank you.
Hi, Gabrielle. First of all, I'm predisposed to really appreciate a project that I think struggles with the idea of what an artifact can offer. So I think you've constructed some of your own artifacts, both through the materials that you brought back, or I think you actually did bring back materials to Milwaukee, right?
Most of it was in the process of collecting found objects here, to basically construct things that I observed there.
Customs claims.
Yes, I cannot do that, unfortunately.
Okay, got it. Okay. I think there's also like the artifacts that you're proposing as well, which are the architectural interventions. I think what becomes confusing for me inside of that, or maybe it's like what I would like to hear more explicitly in the thesis project, is what is the agency, what is the role of these artifacts inside of something that we know are systems, political, ecological, that operate at much larger scales, and how any one of these artifacts, let's say man-made or anthropogenic artifacts, the ones that you're producing at this scale, right, versus the ones that you're proposing at the scale of an architectural folly, versus the ones that you found existing there. We could say like the town or the city as an artifact, versus just like geological strata that are now also anthropogenic there on the island. Like what is the role and the agency of any one of those inside of something much larger? And I'm struggling at the moment to understand what your proposal is at that scale, right? So I understand the proposal at a smaller scale. I don't quite know yet what it offers. And I think this goes back to some of the earlier questions too, like how does it move beyond just the people who live there? And how does it tie into a larger culture of image potentially? Like, is this really meant to influence policy through media? And I can't tell. I think that hasn't really been stated explicitly. So I'm a little bit lost on that scale of things.
Sure. I mean, some thoughts I would like to add is this project, I mean, it's very much so cited in Tuvalu. All the interventions and models are responding to things I experienced and observed while there. That being said, though, I mean, I think what really inspired me about Tuvalu is it's a very extreme condition of how water meets land, how the people interact with it, and it's all very much so like zoomed in at a like hyper scale. But if we think about it at a larger scale, even in the United States, these same things that I was experiencing there are already or will be happening here. So although the project is rooted in Tuvalu, I think the next step in this is thinking about how architecture at various scales can respond to like events and what that means for the people of those specific places, non-human entities, and how they'll be influenced by like various factors that are particular to that place. But I think that is a good point, and I think something that I definitely need to flesh out a bit more.
Yeah, I think scale was also something, I didn't touch on it, but it was something that came to mind. It seems like you know, it's always difficult early on in your architecture career to sort of focus on one thing and really dig into it a bit. So I think that, you know, I think it could have helped you to pick maybe one or two interventions and really try to delve a little deeper in them. I always wondered, like, you know, I asked the question, like, what would it take to save this island? You know, I mean, like, what would it take? Like a giant levee around the entire thing? I mean, is that made of plastic? You know, I mean, my mind was sort of dreaming a little bit larger scale. And then, you know, to Joshua's comments, again, like, is it a prototype that is deployed elsewhere, you know, as an image of reclamation and reuse and protection? Or, you know, I think scale is really important, because I don't know if any, I mean, they all sort of acknowledge the problem, but I don't know if they really fix it. So when you do ambitious projects like this, trying to address significant issues, I think I would have liked to have seen it dialed up to like 20, you know, a little bit, or a million, you know, just to see what the extreme is. But
Yeah, I think that's a good point. They all do definitely have, I mean, they're small interventions located along this ring. And I don't think the intent of the project, although fixing it would be great if we could fix all these issues, but I don't think that's quite what I was trying to tackle here, but more so explore various ways in which an architecture can reveal what's already happening. But
sure,
I
and
definitely
I think
do
scale's
wanna,
appropriate to the place, and you know, I mean, it's digestible for the people that live there. I mean, these, like a huge mega project would probably seem so out of sorts there. So I'm not. It's not a negative comment. It's just, you know, it just gets my mind racing a little bit
Sure.
on what could be possible.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I'm also a little bit curious about the role of film. How did you see that? What's the relationship between that and the drawings, for example, or not even more broadly? Just what was the significance of the film for you?
So my intent with the film, which was made up of videos and imagery and a big model I made once I came home, to really try to pull you all into Tuvalu and what I experienced there. So the photographs, we're trying to zoom in into these different, whether they were instances of intersection between like environmental and man-made elements, or things that were more particular about the place itself. So using film to document those in a way directly lended itself to the models. So by creating that collection of imagery, I essentially sorted them into different categories and produced the different constructs based off of those ideas. And so it was kind of not linear, but a process of going to the place, documenting, using those photographs to inform different ideas, models, and then how those models directly, whether they inspire or create the idea for the intervention.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a very interesting way of sort of describing the complexity of the spatiality of the place and its experience, because to a certain extent, I guess there were many, to maybe refer a little bit to the scale question, there were many kind of overlapping scales in the film. There were literally overlapping images, and the film itself had a peculiar kind of it captured in a very interesting way the spatiality and the temporality of the condition and the kind of interscalar nature, you might say. So in a way, even that dimension of the film as drawing our attention to and pulling us in to a very complex, I guess, set of experiences that are layered, that have historical depth. I thought that was very effective. And maybe there's as I was looking at the film and listening to your presentation and seeing the images and so forth, I thought of a poem by a West Indian writer named Derek Walcott, whom you may or may not know. And the poem is called "The Sea is History." And it's a short poem that he describes in the Caribbean, so another kind of insular context. He describes the historicity of the sea as loaded with essentially historical experiences of violence, so that the sea has this, and it's not merely kind of climatic violence in a way, or the kind of the question of storms and so forth, but it's also kind of the history of appropriation. So I thought maybe that's another dimension that the project kind of foregrounded mediated through, for the most part, I think, waste. But the foregrounding was, I guess it was very optimistic in a way. You know, there's kind of optimism in the film, and optimism in letting things be, which in a way is ambiguous. I think. Did you just remove your project from the screen?
I realized I was showing. I think I didn't know if you all could see it.
All of a sudden, I see everyone paying close attention.
Sorry. Yeah. I think I'm sharing the wrong. Here we go.
Yes, yeah. So maybe in those instances, you kind of hear as well the project speaks perhaps not so explicitly, but I guess through the images and their layering, it speaks to the wider planetary environmental situation, which is also very much a historical situation. So I think trying to negotiate between the high level of specificity of the place and a much larger environmental planetary space is one of the things that I think it's doing effectively. But I think again, to me, the dimension of the imaginary, the dimension of historical experience, that somehow or other would be specific, particular to the population and their kind of intergenerational understandings of the landscape, which probably would go back to mythical horizons. I think I would be curious to see whether that might present itself and whether that might even function to communicate something about our environmental relationships that are very, very difficult to understand in purely quantitative terms. So that's kind of another potential I see in the work.
Hey, Kyle, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Can I say something?
Yes.
It's so good to hear Tao's soothing voice. And I forget how inspiring he was to have around. I think just to piggyback off of a couple of things that he said, I also find projects that lean into the descriptive more than the prescriptive much more interesting, because the prescriptive ones tend to maybe inevitably go to a place that's very reductive, and I think that's presumptuous, and that's sort of especially dangerous in this kind of a context, because you definitely are the interloper. You know, you're the person who's coming in from outside. So, and I think that so in the sense that descriptive is a good thing, as Tao said, I think is a really important thing to think about. Maybe the other word that can then take you from the descriptive somewhere else, and this gets to the question of agency, is maybe instead of being prescriptive, it's projective, right? So you're projecting some kind of a future story, and you're weaving that into what's existing. And I think those are latent, you know, the projections are latent there, but they could be more explicit, which is, I think, where the question of what your authorial agency is in this story. And I think that the use of the film can be really helpful there, because it can get you to, ironically, even though it's a visual medium, it also gets you to very haptic experiences, because you can incorporate sound and you can incorporate other scenarios and sensations that, of course, then can be post-produced and amped up, and you know, you can change and amplify and certain sort of sonic, acoustic qualities to what you're seeing, which could then also bring a sense of urgency maybe in a way, you know, it sort of brings you to a certain present moment rather than just sort of looking at it. So I would encourage you to try to think about this word projective, because what does an intervention mean? What does an architectural intervention mean? What are we intervening on? You know, what are we preventing? What are we altering? What are we, you know, are we, you know? So I think the presumption is that you're not just saying, oh, here it is, look at it. But I think that's part of the story. Like, here it is, look at it. And that's the sort of the descriptive, and I'm going to look at it and help you look with you, you know. But then what is the alteration or potential alteration of course of events, you know, that these moments could instigate in one person, in the entire community, you know, you could scale it up or down. So good work, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Jasmine. Oh, I think there's, sorry, I didn't see the chat.
So there's a few questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to address any of them.
Could you show the island map again that marks the different interventions? Yes.
Hi, Gabrielle, this is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
I actually, Kyle was kind enough to send me the link to get onto the website. So I went and took a look.
Okay.
And I understand now that some of what, when it went by so quick.
Nancy, I think you muted yourself accidentally, perhaps.
I muted myself again. Oh, I forgot. I let go of my space bar. I had just sort of misinterpreted what was land and what was the water inside the atoll. And so I just needed to take a slower look at it. But I think there's another question there for me, and I'll just take this opportunity to ask it. And they're kind of concrete, not literally concrete, but kind of not abstract. And maybe it's unfair because your introduction, I think, described these as fantastical interventions or something, and yet they were very functional interventions that you were proposing. So I was kind of wondering whether you'd gotten into issues like the materiality of some of these things. I was particularly interested in the illuminating sprouts in that regard, like what are the sprouts made of? Where is the water coming from that's in the tank? Is it really fresh water for island use, or is it a warning system that the seawaters are rising? So I would just be interested if there's anything you can share about that.
Sure. So I didn't quite get to materiality, unfortunately, but I would love to hear if anyone has any ideas. The idea for this is, let me see if I can. If we look at the plan of this, so the lagoon and the Pacific Ocean, this is a very narrow portion of the island. So the land is constantly being flooded from the water, but also from the rain that settles into the land. So the idea would be that there's a way for this underwater tank to collect the water from both the rain and the pooling from the lagoon and ocean. And I haven't obviously worked out the logistics yet, but filter it in a way that it would be used as fresh water for the people. And then for the sprouts, some sort of way for there to be, I guess, a joint system along it that would provide rigid support, but still enough flexibility and movement for them to be able to react to the rain. But again, didn't quite get there. So yeah, if anyone has any ideas, I would love to hear.
Well, I'll just add in closing that the imagery is really quite lovely and evocative, and makes one want to experience this thing.
Thank you.
I want to maybe just for a second address, Gabrielle, I think that what's implicit here is that this island is acting as a bellwether, that whatever happens here, we know that the repercussions are going to move around the globe, basically, right? And just the first moment that we can understand things in such visceral terms, right? So to be cynical inside that a little bit for a moment, right? Like that it's being proposed as a little bit like a canary in a coal mine, right? That and I think the project in a way has to acknowledge this, you know, that the poster that says save the island, save the world, you know, like is that really the case, you know, and what other options are there inside that, you know, like is there also the possibility that like through these interventions you actually show the devastation of the island and that saves the world, right? Like that's a very different thing from save the island, save the world, right? Like and I think that the project at this moment is a little bit confused in terms of what its role can be, right? Like my fear is that it's almost like there would be T-shirts that are like the end of the world happened and all I got was this play set, you know, like this play, right? Like, and I think, but I do think that when things work well, they're like, I mean, I also think this image right now that we're looking at is incredibly compelling, right? Like. But in a way, it's about the propagation and the dissemination of this image that becomes the most important thing, right? Like I think it needs to move beyond the island, is my guess, and there's not a strategy for that yet inside the project. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that, right? Like I think that all of these interventions could be incredibly meaningful, but I wonder if the audience is the wrong audience, you know, and this counters almost directly what Tao was talking about, in that I'm not sure if the audience for this project is actually the residents of the island. I can't tell. I'm confused by that. But that's the way it's been proposed, but it doesn't really seem like that's where the greatest impact can be.
Can I say one last thing? I know that we're running long, but I think that it has to be said because it's so bizarre and eerie and kind of disturbing to me. Like, but I want to say congrats for doing it. Is this idea that you haven't distilled the trash from the natural environment and instead you're proposing sort of this hybridized new material that's like part man-made, part natural, and it's kind of, it really bothers me, but because I'm so used to saying like, you know, like just keep trying and separate the two, and it takes some guts to say this is sort of what it is and how can we work with what we have currently. So I think that's, you know, the default is to say like we're going to put a plastic recycling plant and we're going to have social classes to teach people to, you know, put their bottles in the bin. But instead you're saying like, we're just going to use what's there and make it, you know, and sort of show it in all its glory, I suppose. And so I think it takes some real guts to do that. And so congrats on that.
Thanks.
But maybe also to I was thinking of that as well, Danielle. I couldn't quite find a way to describe it, the ambiguity, I suppose. And I think it's there's something about the project that has the character of the melancholy. The way, in a certain way, kind of, there is a certain relief, we might say, or maybe even a peculiar kind of, maybe not these images, but the images of your project, where they become appropriated. There is something, yeah, there's something maybe melancholic about it.
Yeah, fate accepted.
Yes, and the lingering with that as a moment of, the way in a peculiar kind of way, there is a strange joy in the experience of melancholy that's very difficult to describe. So So that's, I thought of that as well, Daniel, that peculiar ambiguity. The project is lingering in a certain, in a peculiarly ambiguous zone. So yeah, and that's you know, in a way that's it. That's what makes it so kind of extraordinarily compelling at this point, in a way, right? And what direction you were to take it in. I guess I'd be curious, or not just this project, but your own thinking, your own kind of environmental thinking and imagination. So I'd be curious to see what happens
and also
beyond.
And also just in the future for you in your career and your trajectory, you know, I don't know if it's of interest to you, but there are a lot of hybrid materials out there, recycled materials, and, you know, everything from you know, rammed earth walls using, you know, embedding different materials and stuff like that. So I think that there's a lot of length on that, you know, piece of your study.
We have about 3 minutes left, so I don't know if there's any kind of final thoughts, if Jose or Chris had anything to add, or if there are any other questions from all the others on the call.
I think I was just thinking, I mean, first I want to congratulate you, Gabrielle. It's been fantastic to work with you, even though you've really done it all yourself, and of course, Kyle, with your primary chair advisor. The project is really fantastic and beautiful, and I really have loved the comments, particularly Joshua's and Tao's, the kind of trying to tie this to a larger narrative, and also understanding perhaps the role of representation and film, like Tao brought up. The project has been reminding me all semester of just Allison and Peter Smithson and the As Found, and the kind of post-Blitz London, where like this is doing something like it, but in like a larger environmental context. And so I think precisely the question of how does this tie to that larger narrative is crucial. And I just wanted to say that, especially I know you've been doing this now, right in the middle of the coronavirus, and putting the website together, which we haven't really talked about, I know was in itself a design project. And I think there's something about the collection and the archiving of materials and the way that you began to sort them out, even in the website, as a design exercise that I think was productive, or is productive, to how you're thinking about this in the larger context of environmental forces and ecological disasters and so on. So this is all to say that, and I always kind of try to say this in thesis reviews, a thesis is supposed to be the project that you work on for the rest of your life. And I think you have plenty here for that. So congrats. And I'm also looking forward to seeing where it takes you.
Thanks, Jose.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end. I just wanted to echo Jose's comments and a really great conversation, and congratulate you, Gabrielle, on a really amazing thesis. And also your ability to kind of shift gears mid-semester, because this project was, as you can see from the imagery, largely based in physical making, right, for the first half of the semester. And you had to shift pretty dramatically. And you've done a really amazing job at kind of keeping up the trajectory that you set out at the beginning of the semester. I still would love to see the 14-foot physical map.
Yep.
Maybe at some point in the future, but I understand if you would want to take a break from this. But congratulations, Gabrielle. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.